All right, well, it's 12:05, so we will go ahead and get started. Like I said, those that are just joining, just getting rolling. And thanks everyone for getting on. I'm sure we may have some others trickle on. Like I said, we are recording this and will be available afterwards. So I want to welcome everybody to part two of our cloud webinar series. Today we're focusing on days 1 and 2 of the cloud journey. So really the migration and day-to-day operations once you're starting and into your cloud journey and cloud setup. I'm joined today by Joe Partlow from ReliaQuest and Craig Pilkington from Hylaine. I'll give these gentlemen a chance to introduce themselves here shortly, but really appreciate them joining us today to take part in this conversation. I do want to give a quick overview of Opkalla for those who may not be familiar with who we are and what we do. So we are a trusted advisor in the technology space. And so we're coming in to help customers with day-to-day struggles they have. And really it's around knowing that IT is becoming more important than ever in everyone's environment, which means the days of just having to worry about turning dials, pushing buttons, keeping the lights on are long gone. And now everybody's being asked to operate in a more critical piece of the business, which doing that also with facing a lean staff, a lean environment, maybe reduced budgeting overall, constant evaluations going on, potentially navigating biased agendas from all sides of the aisle, and just really not having enough time because of all these things. So Opkalla came along 3 years ago into the industry to help be a trusted advisor to these IT firms, so that we go out, we look at the market, we look at the industry, we partner with solution providers like we have with us today with ReliaQuest and Hylaine, and we make sure that as we go through with our customers and do assessments and analysis, bring providers to evaluate and help them get to decisions ultimately, that we're bringing the best providers at the best time for these customers and meeting people where they are and helping them on their IT journey, helping them map this out and take the best take the best route to get to their destination for each individual customer, and not coming in with any preconceived designs, because everyone is different. Everyone's trying to tackle this in a little bit different way. So lots of experience on our team, 20 plus years of IT consulting experience. We've done probably now close to 3,000 plus evaluations, over 300 probably now customers, and lots of money and time saved for our customer base. These are all the areas that Opkalla can help and play in with your organization. These are our core areas of conversation. And obviously today we're going to be spending a lot of time around the public cloud solutions and what goes into those. So again, thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Craig and Joe to do some introductions of themselves. And Craig, we'll start with you and then go over to Joe.
Craig Pilkington, principal architect. Been around with Hylaine for 3 years since its 5-year journey so far. But I've been in technology since the late 90s. Hylaine helps clients with app dev, BI, cloud, delivery services, all the things to do project management, and partners with Opkalla to help clients when they have those application development or integration needs that might need some assistance.
All right, yeah, and my name is Joe Partlow, and like Craig, I've pretty much spent my entire career doing architecture and infrastructure across various systems. Currently the CTO at ReliaQuest, and ReliaQuest basically is we have a security operations platform that's built on a cloud-based open XDR architecture, and really it's a force multiplier for your security operations and threat intel teams. And we do that kind of by reducing the complexity, managing risk, and increasing visibility. But happy to be here. Thanks, Jeff. Looking forward to having a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig and Joe. And Yep. So everybody, I'm Jeff Garrett, VP of Solutions Architecture at Opkalla, and I will be our moderator and guide for the day as we walk through the wonderful conversation of cloud. So yeah, for those that were able to join the last one or go back and listen to part one, we talked a lot about architecting, and a lot of that conversation around, focus on infrastructure as a service. And I think that Joe and Craig bring some unique viewpoints into the architecture side. So while we'll get into, like I said, migrating and day-to-day governance, gentlemen, I do want to, give you guys a chance to talk about some of the things you see out there, maybe some missteps, and the architecting of the cloud, really that day zero side of things as customers are preparing to go in, where they may miss some common mistakes, again, some common missteps as they go in that. And Joe, I'll start with you, and then Craig, you can go as well. But Joe, what are you seeing out there from some missteps in the architecture piece?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that we see, especially since we're dealing a lot of times with the visibility and security side of it, it's a little bit of I think the Wild West a little bit, where right now I think folks, everyone that I talk to has some sort of initiative of moving some of their on-prem stuff into the cloud. Some are further than others for that, but a lot of times we see just that people are hoping to kind of lift and shift that, and a lot of times it doesn't really work that way. It's a different way of doing things sometimes. I think the things that get missed a lot are really focusing on access, making sure that the roles that the teams need may not kind of directly relate to the on-prem world of kind of who's an admin, who's not. It's a lot more granular. And a lot of times the logging infrastructure is something that we run into, that there is a different way of logging, right? There's different layers that you need to look into. A lot of times that's kind of an afterthought, I think, for that. So, I think those two things are two big ones that we see that are overlooked a lot.
Yeah, Craig, kind of same thing to you. It's and what are you seeing, and what have you seen with customers that are kind of those missteps in architecting as they think about going into the cloud?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would tag on to what Joe said and what you said, Jeff, about lift and shifts. We get it to the cloud, got a checkbox done, but then usually they have us come in, and probably you as well. It's like, oh, now we need a cost analysis because we're spending too much and we don't know where all the spend is coming from, because we took what we thought we needed on premises into the cloud. That's a big one, where they've oversized their VMs, or if they did a VM. The other part is applications that go to the cloud. They haven't taken the time to modernize them. They're just run them on a VM server up there, or if they're into Docker containers, they've containerized it, but it's still basically that same old school application running up in the cloud, and doesn't take advantage of the latest software as a service components that can save them a lot of money over time.
Right, and I think that that kind of plays in Joe, you're mentioning security, and that something Craig you touched on just then was, it's the same old thing. They try to do it a little bit different way, but it's the same old thing. And maybe taking some of those preconceived notions of how they did things on prem and moving that, and not really thinking about, hey, as I'm migrating into the cloud, I do have to think about what it looks like. I have to think about things differently, not just on the security side, but the infrastructure side. And I guess Joe, kind of back to you. Where are you helping customers, or where are you seeing some talking points of things that people really need to think about differently? Security, infrastructure, otherwise. I mean, I know you probably, even though ReliaQuest operates in the security space, you're probably helping customers in a lot of ways in cloud journeys.
Yeah, and we certainly were not a traditional cloud architecture firm, and I think we've kind of had to have that expertise just because of that, right? It's a lot of folks don't have those teams, or those teams are not working side by side with the security team. So when it comes down to, well, hey, what's the best way to do this? We really have to kind of help them out with that. So if you look at kind of the big three, and we'll talk AWS, GCP, and Azure. A lot of times there's a lot of built-in security tools that all three of those providers are getting a lot better over the years of giving teams kind of some help with that. Just wizards to kind of predefine things or built-in tools, especially on the security side, to kind of help folks. I think all of them realize that you can't just, unplug the traditional security devices, especially on the network side, and just kind of plug those in. It's a totally different model. So, helping those folks kind of be aware of those security tools. A couple of the ones that we see a lot are, if you're running something like a Guard Duty or a Prisma Cloud or the various Defenders, a lot of native tools as well. So when you look at kind of those overlay tools that are kind of cloud focused, as along with the built-in ones, that's kind of what we see a little bit, and then helping them build out the logging infrastructure. Step one is defining, all right, what's going to be in there, and what do we need to get visibility into, and then really kind of helping folks design that logging architecture. Obviously, the end goal for us is, from a security standpoint, making sure that we've got visibility into the various infrastructure and applications and usage. But obviously, that data is important for metrics and health and marketing. For app usage and things like that. So those are some of the things that we see. I think making sure that they take advantage of those built-in tools or those cloud native security tools, which are fortunately getting easier or more plentiful as we go.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and you talk about utilizing those tools and utilizing that space. I think Craig, especially working on the development side of things and helping customers as you guys are plugging in and helping them kind of retool, figure out how they maybe use more cloud native services. Obviously DevSecOps has been around for a while. We've heard that term, following on DevOps. I'm curious, are you seeing that really perpetrate throughout the market, or is DevSecOps, is it catching on as it should, or is there still some missing security in the development into cloud native as migrations start?
Yeah, I think there's still some missings that are happening in there, just because, even just DevOps alone may not have been as mature in some of those organizations, and now they're moving to the cloud, and so they have the same learnings they still have to do. It's one of the things we always do when we start a project is, we have our CI/CD right from the beginning, so we understand exactly what it is. And part of it too is there's two other parts of that in the journey. Is that one, each cloud provider that Joe talked about, they each have a different way of how you get online in the cloud and how you set things up. Azure is very get your tools set up, get them going, stuff like that, and then do security afterwards. AWS is you have to hook everything up first before you can actually view anything on the web. So it takes more. But there's a lot of tools out there that need to be set up, and this goes to kind of how you do modern development for microservices. Is you need to think about, you're not just inside your firewall anymore where your employees are trusted. You're skirting on the edge of the internet. And so, you need to have your API gateways in front of anything you do. You need to have, Windows Azure front door to make sure that, nobody's getting into your system. Your API development has to use good security practices so that they're secure right off the bat, because they are right on the edge of the internet. So I think there's multiple pieces to it around security and DevSecOps that you need to take into account, and not just tools, but patterns and practices you have to implement.
Yeah, I'll definitely second what you said, Craig, especially for us, from making sure that you're building automation into that CI/CD pipeline is critical, because as you said, security comes as an after fact. So if you don't put that automation in your process, we just don't see it happening. And then, like you said, it's a lot harder to kind of bolt that on, just like in the traditional world, right? If you try to bolt it on at the end, especially the scale that folks are running at, with entire environments spinning up and spinning down. You can't have that traditional model of, let me install the agent and it connects back to get visibility. It's got to be built into that whole pipeline. So it's definitely something that we see as well. That's critical.
Yeah, and that's you're talking about now that usage right now, as we're getting into that usage, and now Joe, you talked about some of that stuff that's I would say more cloud native that you get out of that just lift and shift when you're talking about the actual scale, and now things start to look different. Craig, I want to go to something you touched on. You touched on, looking at ROI, right? And as customers start to migrate into the cloud, maybe talk about some of the things that you're seeing as, hey, we're migrating in, where can they start looking to avoid some of that lift and shift to really start, looking at how do I get a good return on investment of moving into this, and not just doing it because, I think the thing we always hear is like, the C-level who goes away and sees that oh, everybody's going to the cloud, we need to do the cloud, right? How do they really start looking at getting a good ROI on that migration into cloud?
Yeah, a good way to do it is to start small, one project at a time, as opposed to a enterprise move. Okay, 6 months we're moving everything. Start with one thing, figure out what you're going to implement, how you're going to do it. Use the cost modeling tools up front. All the 3 cloud providers have these great calculation tools where you can say, well, even if you're doing the old school versus new SaaS provider pieces, you can figure out like, okay, well, I'm going to use this tool. I think I'm going to get this much throughput. It's going to cause this many RUs or RAM or pieces like that, and then you can do a cost analysis per month, quarter, year, and that kind of gets you where you think you're going to have your spend. And then once you deploy, you can actually start measuring that against your analysis, and have threshold limits, alerts, monitoring, reporting, so that way you can start measuring that ROI. Because if you don't have a plan ahead of time of what you're going to track, you can't measure it and then measure to that plan. And so once you start figuring out, oh, we underutilized or under-designed what our utilization was, or over-designed it, you can start figuring out how to do that better. And then you can actually start realizing those ROIs of, well, it's dormant during this time, so we shut down, so we were able to cut down on 20% here, but we underestimated this part. And so it cost us a little more. So we now need to think about, is that a good use for that, or can it be leveraged into some other type of provider or component?
Yeah, and you mentioned one thing there, right, about kind of that phasing in. That I think that goes, that ties into something Joe was mentioning that I think about with, making sure you're logging and looking properly. That everybody needs to think about. It's not going to be over a weekend I'm in the cloud, right? It's not just going to happen. I'm going to be. I would say most organizations are going to be running hybrid. There's a good chance that a lot of organizations are going to be using multi-cloud, whether that be SaaS-based applications or even in the multi-hyperscalers. And so, from I think both your standpoints, how do you, what are some things, as they're doing that migration in the cloud, to pay attention to that, hey, you're operating now in a hybrid world, and taking into account how that looks for your workloads, your security, and everything in between.
Yeah, definitely from our side, a lot of stuff that we run into from that standpoint is from the data side, right? So like you said, Jeff, like everybody is some sort of hybrid right now, to what state that usually depends. But everybody wants to take advantage of kind of the new technologies, whether that's Docker, Kubernetes, any of these things that are coming out, because that's kind of one of the use cases for going to the cloud. But then, like you said, in those multiple environments, how do you deal with the data on that? Do you migrate all that data to one or another? Do you let that data kind of run out its usefulness where it sits and then kind of cut over? A lot of times what we deal with is a lot of that aggregation. So while you're in that mid phase, which is pretty much everybody right now, it's expensive to move that data around, right? You start getting into exfil costs and things like that. And, you're dealing with petabytes or more of data. Building up those ETL processes or those data pipelines gets expensive from a resource standpoint. And a lot of, especially security teams, just don't have that expertise or those resources. So kind of one of the things that we see and had some success with is really kind of, this notion of the data lake that was popular a few years ago. Everybody's got multiple data lakes now. So you almost have to kind of, how do you aggregate that data when you need it? And wherever that data sits. So having that layer that says, hey, we've got this security incident, or maybe this marketing information we may need to go to 3 or 4 different data lakes or data ponds to try to get that. How do do, I think Gartner kind of coined it as data stitching. How do you stitch that data together so that you get that full kind of visibility? You can tell that full story. That sounds easy, but it's obviously it's not, right? When you've got multiple ways of getting that data, multiple ways that data is stored. So that's kind of one of the big challenges that we see from a migration standpoint. Great new technologies. Everybody's kind of moving the stuff over. It's working good. It's scaling out good. But the data sometimes is a little bit of an afterthought of, okay, well, how's the people have to make sense of that, whether that's your business analyst team or your data science team or your security folks, making sure that they can get to all that in a timely manner and not breaking the bank.
Yeah, I'd add on to that, Joe. There's like not only the logging, which you hit on a lot, is the logging becomes an afterthought of, oh, well, I got stuff on premises, I have stuff in the cloud. How do I now stitch this back together? And there's, each of the vendors has, some of the vendors have tools that will allow you to do that. Azure has Lighthouse, which will allow you to pull everything without having to exfil your data. So you need a plan ahead of time of, not only logging, but reporting, and how am I going to validate this, in the hybrid environment. We've had giant integration layers we've built for clients that are bridging that hybrid gap. And we come up with a plan like all the logging is going to be here at this level. But we also have extra logging that goes into the cloud's SaaS function, just so we have an extra set, but the core is in one place that everybody can view it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you're both starting to touch on some things around, you kind of both mentioned at this point scale, right? I mean, in the scale of the cloud, and Joe, you're talking specifically about scaling into that with just on the data side, but that's one of the key components of why people use public hyperscalers, right? Is to be able to scale quickly. I think is they get in there. One thing is, yes, that's a benefit, but I think I've also seen customers who get a little bit out over their skis with scaling, and keeping their scale optimized. And sometimes scale and optimization don't go hand in hand. They could be different things, but sometimes they do. Is that I have to make sure that I'm optimizing as I scale. Maybe talk a little bit about that, and I think that plays into both of your backgrounds of scaling and optimizing around security, scaling and optimizing around workloads. And again, Craig, going back to something you're talking about, the ROI, right? Of kind of keeping ROIs in check as I start using just the ability to spin up at a moment's notice.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think there's probably anybody on this webinar that hasn't got that angry note from the CFO of, hey, why is our cloud bill obscene? And I'm certainly no different. So that's I think where a lot of folks, it's after that migration step is done and hey, everything's great. We've got our use cases covered. There's sometimes a little bit of a sticker shock of, oh my God, what have we done, right? So I think one of the things that we see a lot that helps, and even internally for our systems, is getting that automation down, right? So if you don't need those resources, spinning them down when you don't need them, and you can do that with a variety of ways. You obviously, Craig touched a little bit on that CI/CD process. We've seen folks kind of roll their own with Terraform and Puppet and things like that you can kind of do your own, hack your own kind of spin up and spin down scripts. Lambda is you can do some built-in scripts for that. But that's I think from my point of view, a lot of times the automation side of that, one, kind of know what you need and what you don't need and when, and work closely with those teams to know, hey, what's and that's a downside that we see from the security side, is a lot of times those folks are not talking to the developer team, the infrastructure team. Hey, what's critical, what's not? Not everything has to be up and running all the time. So having those layers in place of, hey, what's mission critical? It's always got to be up. What are maybe some stuff that needs to be up at business hours versus not business hours? Just so you can kind of optimize that infrastructure. That's obviously one of the advantages why everybody is moving to the cloud, that you're not kind of stuck with this hardware that's, power buttons either on or off. We have that ability to scale up or scale down. So, but automation is the key that we see to that. Everybody's got too much to do that manually. So making sure that you've got those good scripts to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of the tools have some of the components inside the major cloud providers have that automatically now. If it's not a SaaS solution where it's on a consumption model, if you can afford that lag time for a startup, they'll have that where they'll automatically like, oh, I can spin you down, during these hours, or only the storage, is still costing you, but everything else spins down so that you don't have to worry about that. From, a good part of it is just like, any website, you figure out how many users you're going to have concurrent, how much workload, are you having a special sale that you need to bulk up and have your pieces do that. The cloud gives us an ability to scale automatically, but you pay for it if it goes too high, or if you're not planning for it when it has to add extra resources on the fly. And so some of your users may be impacted that, where it waits for that extra time to spin up. Even Docker and Kubernetes have spin up time for new containers. It's just a matter of the best practice is to plan when you think you need it, what you think you're going to need, and then try to adapt that, and then be mindful of every quarter how much you're going to be needing and going forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, and you're touching on something there, Craig, too, about when you're talking about, and Joe as well, when you're talking about the spin up and spin down, right? To being able to spin up and spin down, and I think that's something that really gets overlooked of when I'm bringing in, because we do see a lot of, hey, I'm going to lift and shift, I'm going to get it there now, then we're going to come back and kind of redesign, and just overlooking the aspect of, hey, maybe there's some workloads, even if they're not ready for cloud native services, there's some workloads within my environment that I probably never thought about spin up, spin down, because they've been sitting in, a virtualized stack on my on-prem hardware that I don't really need to worry about that, because it's not necessarily, I mean, in a sense it is costing you, but not to the same extent it will in a public cloud provider, that, hey, I can just make use of this utility-based pricing of spinning these down when I don't need them, and then spinning them back up. But I think orchestration, like automation, comes in heavy there, especially when, I say it with customers like test dev environments, and we can spin this down overnight, we spin it back up for the developers, right? Or VDI environments where we're spinning that down and spinning that back up. But automation is key there, I think, because you don't want to, you want to make sure it's there at the right time for the people, but you also don't want to introduce human error into this. I'm going to spin down, spin back up, because that could also open security holes as the more you manually do that within those hyperscalers. So one of the things on, again, scaling and optimizing is the idea of optimizing cost around and again, it goes back to the ROI conversation. And I'm interested to see how you guys see this. Is I think a lot of customers come in and they say, okay, we feel like we've planned this all out, and we're bringing these security tool sets based on what we've read in the market or what we've talked to, and we're going to buy these reserved instances up front, and we're going to put these security tools in up front, and we're going to do all this up front. I'm interested to see what you guys think, one way or the other, because I feel like there's probably some goods to that, but maybe there's in planning, but there could also be negatives to that, and you don't really know what your environment's going to look like, and maybe it's better to give it some burn-in time to figure out what fits best, and what you need to do to best optimize from a cost, security, connectivity, all of the above. So any thoughts around that area for you guys about customers bringing tool sets preconceived or versus kind of phasing into that?
Yeah, I think from the built-in side, I'll give AWS a shout out on this. They've come a long way from a forecasting standpoint of, hey, what do you think the bill's going to be based off your usage? Kind of getting those forecasts. I know our accounting teams and our customers' accounting teams have kind of loved that, because it kind of gives you a little peek in it. Now, is it 100% accurate? No. There's always those surprises of, hey, I've left my machine learning environment up and running, and now we're broke. So there's always those surprises. But I think that like I said, AWS is kind of one of the best ones that I've seen of having those billing kind of tools to help you look at that. Obviously there's if you've got a mature development team and they're working with the infrastructure very close, a lot of times we don't see that on the security side, but maybe from the dev side, Craig, you're seeing that a little bit better, that they're working together to kind of, fine tune that. But that's our security teams are a lot of times dependent on those teams or the built-in tools, which are luckily getting a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's still a learning process, to not just throw stuff up in the cloud and see which, I need a 12 core server. No, this is dev. You can kind of get along a little bit. You scale your environments by what you need based off of where you're going to do load testing, that kind of thing. And, doing the load testing will help you determine, so Jared, if you mentioned a reserved instance, you get a lower cost over time by saying, I want to buy at least this much right now. It's one of those things you have to, do you need that? Is your workload going to be high enough? Are you running an eBay behind the scenes and that kind of stuff, or a mobile gaming platform where you need high transactions kind of a thing? So doing those kind of pieces will help, but I think it's important that, infrastructure, dev, and security all work together, because then we figure out everything ahead of time, and that kind of gives that whole DevSecOps part. So you're not having to bolt on things later. So I try to work with our clients and teach my developers. It's like, okay, you got to think about this stuff as you go along. Every piece of it, you got to make sure it's secure, got to make sure you're keeping costs down, and that you're only implementing what you need to get the job done for the client.
Yeah, I think, Craig, I mean, you started, there with what you said about all those teams working together. More so than ever, I think silos have to be broken down, which, was the idea behind DevOps, DevSecOps. I find it interesting that I had somebody or a podcast I was listening to kind of point this out, and I apologize because I can't remember which podcast it was, of one of the many IT podcasts I listened to, but the idea that like DevOps and DevSecOps, that was supposed to be a team of people, and now you see postings for like a DevSecOps engineer. It's like there's not supposed to be a DevSecOps engineer. It's supposed to be a team of people working together and not just one person doing all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some clients where we fit them a person into a team to try and help out that, and to help drive innovation and things like that. But yeah, it is a person who's supposed to know all of this stuff, and and they've worked in source code, they've done security. It's like that's a lot. But yeah, let's all work with your teams to try and make sure we get the right things done, even if that's more than one person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of transition a little bit into the, okay, we're here, we're using the cloud, we've migrated in, we're starting to scale and optimize, but now comes the fun part of, okay, now what? We got, day after day, right? Or the day two, right? The operations, the day-to-day of treating this, and I'm going to touch on something that has been around forever in IT, but is exploded with cloud usage. And a lot of this, going back to something Joe said, with not having proper rights set up for individuals, is shadow IT and public cloud, right? And I think that becomes a big part of, day-to-day, a first stepping stone in day-to-day governance and security is, our people have more permissions do they need, and how do customers mitigate that if shadow IT becomes rampant in maybe a public cloud environment?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely from a security side, that's a lot of what we see, right? Is if you look at kind of most of the breaches or incidents that have been kind of well publicized, right? Like a lot of it came down to wrong permissions, right? Or misconfigurations. It's, hey, somebody left a public storage bucket world readable or writable when they didn't mean to, or left an API exposed when they shouldn't. So there's, yeah, when you're talking kind of permissions from that side of it, that's kind of the two of the big things that we see. I think there's still that old notion of kind of, the people building those perimeter security devices out, and then you're kind of soft and chewy in the middle because there's no internal. There's plenty of controls available to do that. A lot of it comes down to permission. So making sure, we've touched on kind of the roles a couple of times, making sure those roles are defined for again, not like the old world where it's, hey, can I even get to this machine or not? But hey, can I use this app, or can I use this app function or not? Getting it down to that granular role just to minimize that exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from the shadow IT in with the cloud. I mean, in the old days, it was, hey, can you just rack a server for me? It'll just be one, I promise. And then you got a whole thing, or it's underneath somebody's desk. In the cloud, I see it where if there's not good enterprise controls of who's allowed to purchase certain things, it's so easy to jump into the cloud that business units, if they feel that IT isn't helping drive the business or is too slow, they'll go buy their own subscription and get their tenant. And then next thing you know, a year later down the road, they have a bunch of production level apps that have to be supported. And now the cloud team, who didn't know anything about it, is now trying to support n number of tenants spread across, could be multiple clouds. I've seen that before. We've had a couple clients where the business units weren't talking to each other and they had all three. And managing that was a nightmare because they didn't have enough resources for managing all those type of clients.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat the other day that talked about, and this is not just public cloud, this is talking about just, I mean, even in the SaaS-based app world, where development teams alone in a lot of organizations, there's an average of maybe 10 different tools that they're using. And maybe every sub development team has a different tool they're using for collaboration, for deployment, for automation, for orchestration. And so, some of this may just be education within an organization about making sure you're standardizing across even just tool sets that you're using.
Yeah, and like I said, most of the incidents we deal with, it's some environment that the security team had no idea was there. It could be, hey, marketing spun up this SaaS app that they're using and nobody even knew, and then it gets compromised and things like that. So yeah, it's so easy, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose of having these environments where you can spin up stuff and quick time to market, if you will. But yeah, it's from a visibility on the security side, it's a real risk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious, Craig, dealing with more developers, but Joe, you may see this too. When cloud's been around for a while, right? Since early 2010s. And I think a lot of it driven by developer use, especially in the AWS space. I feel like, Azure is kind of more trying to adapt to the operations folks when they first came out, but, they each are adapting. But I say that to say, I think a lot of developers and operations guys got used to dealing directly with those consoles, which I think, brings along inherent risk of, things getting out of whack from day to day. Like we're scaling, we're adding, we lose a little bit of control, their security. Are you guys seeing customers go use more tools like Terraform and those type, Ansibles of the world, as opposed to direct, interacting directly with these cloud consoles? Or is it still kind of a mixed bag out there?
I see it personally as a mixed bag for our clients who for app dev. A lot of it is, we're going to use whatever the tool is best at that time because we're technology agnostic. So if they're a big Jenkins shop, we'll use Jenkins to do a lot of the CI/CD. I don't see a lot of infrastructure as code deployments personally in Hylaine's. It's mostly code deployments. So, Azure DevOps handling most of that. A little bit of infrastructure as code. There's Puppet, of course, Octopus, but most of the time it's usually Azure DevOps or some other form of it. I even have one client on Bitbucket doing things, deploying that way. And while it works for some things, I see a mix across the board. I guess it just depends. There's no one thing that everybody seems to do for this, but it's always been, well, the enterprise is using Jenkins, so that's what we're going to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely second that, Craig. I mean, we see everybody using everything, and we're probably guilty of this ourselves, right? Like different teams like different things. And like you said, maybe one's using Jenkins, maybe you've got a team that's hobbled together some Ansible scripts and they're doing it that way. So I think it is getting better though. It is getting better though. I think, a few years back, it definitely was a lot more disparate. I think now that the teams are getting better at working together, that the dev, the infrastructure, or the platform teams, and then as well as security teams, instead of everybody kind of rolling their own and just scrambling to hack something together. I think those teams are working. They're getting there. They're certainly not there yet, but getting there to where it is kind of that consolidated tool set, because then you can leverage, a lot of kind of reuse and knowledge share. Because frankly, that's kind of the big thing that we see is there's little pockets of knowledge for these different tools, but then when something major happens, you've got to now assemble all those folks to figure out what's going on, as opposed to the teams being able to jump in and kind of help out and see what's going on. So it's getting better, but definitely second Craig's comment that it's still pretty varied and diverse.
Yeah, and just I kind of want to open it up here a little bit to you guys, just in that day-to-day governance, in that security, in that overall, like, again, because we've touched a lot on architecting through part one of the series into now, migration. I think we kind of talked about is that, it needs to be planned out, but it needs to not be, don't think that's going to happen all at once, right? That it could take months. It could take, in some cases, years to do proper migrations, but really thinking about, that day-to-day, I'm in here and operating in the cloud. Is there anything you guys see that are big stumbling blocks for customers you interacted with, that when they get into operating in the cloud, whether it's SaaS-based applications, public cloud, any form of cloud, as opposed to what they're used to with on-prem, any big, huge stumbling blocks?
I think one of the big ones here is forgetting that your governance, your security, your monitoring, your cost analysis is a living document or process, and that you need to continually review it. You need to have dashboards that show you not only your process flow to make sure your data is going through correctly, whatever it's supposed to do, but that, are you on target for costs? Are you getting charged for when extras are spinning up? Have you used the tools out of the box just in the cloud that says, am I secure? And then looking at the processes, looking at the governance, making sure your shadow IT isn't suddenly adding a new global admin that starts spinning up a data factory all over the place, or EC2s. I think it needs to be a living thing, and that's a stumbling block. It's like a fire and forget when you rack the server, that we need to remember and remind people of, that you have to constantly have a team, have to care and feeding both the team and the process.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. We see kind of, a few big areas of where people get bit by this, right? I think it all kind of stems back to that shared services responsibility or model, right? I think a lot of teams, especially if they're new or haven't done it, or you've got some shadow IT happening, it's assumed that the cloud provider is doing all that for you, right? It's so easy. Hey, I'm gonna throw my app up, spin it up. They got this, right? They're assuming backups are getting done. They're securing, all the external configurations are all locked down for them. And, maybe if you've scaled out your infrastructure and scripted it right, maybe they've got the sandbox and they're good, but a lot of times not. So making sure that those teams, who's ever responsible for that or able to do it, knows, hey, what's the responsibility of the platform? What's my responsibility? And that can vary wildly, right? If you're deploying entire infrastructure, that's probably all going to be on you. If you're deploying VMs or certain instances or clusters, that's a little bit, both. And then all the way down to the granularity of, hey, I've got an app or a specific automation that I'm running in a Lambda pipeline or something, like, then that shrinks of kind of what I'm responsible for. So making sure that you kind of know what that is. Like I said, it's really kind of on the teams to make sure that they are configuring it right, that they're not leaving stuff open, that they are locking that down. So that's kind of a second big area that we see a lot of folks is, let's face it, there's a lot of settings in there to make sure that you get right. So that's kind of where it comes back to that automation of making sure that you've got that environment scripted out, locked down, because if you're trying to do that manually on the fly, it's going to cause problems. And we've seen it time and time again, I think, with public incidents of, world readable and writable buckets. I think the other concern that we see a lot from customers is just kind of the data residence. where is that data going to live? Where can it live? Can somebody from outside of a particular country get to that data and read it? And are they allowed to, right? So that's, when you talk about kind of governance, data classification has always been something that teams have struggled with since the beginning of time, right? Is, hey, who can get to this data? Where does it live? How classified or how sensitive is it? And now you've got that extra kind of tack on of, well, okay, well, where is it? And, you think got things like GDPR and things that really kind of limit where that data can flow in and out of. So those are a few of the big things that we see, that are stumbling blocks now from especially the security and risk teams.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate what you were saying, Joe, because anytime I talk about cloud of any kind, I'm going to harp on shared responsibility models. Every cloud provider you talk to should have a shared responsibility model. They'll have something that tells you where where they stop, where your responsibility starts. I think that's a must for everybody to know. It's as far as when you start talking about training, right? When you start talking about retraining the way you think, you need to know that you need to ask that question every time you go into a new cloud provider of any kind. Know where your responsibility is. So I will continually harp on that, because so many people would just think, oh, it's cloud, they back it up for me, right? That's data's taken care of.
You can still get hit with ransomware in the cloud, and it's still on you to have a good backup, right? So
Yep, absolutely. One other thing here, it is, you talk about like how easy it is together, how easy it is to go hit those buttons. There's how much information is out there though, and how, if you're looking at all this and trying to take it all in, and you look at, if you just go pull up, kind of be overwhelming if you just go like to AWS and Azure and pull up the services list, right? Here's all the services that you have access to. Maybe talk about, some of the modern tool sets that you're seeing that kind of help cut through that noise. And I think we talked about a little bit about that with, on the automation orchestration side, but how important that is to, reduce the complexity of what you see, but then also on the security side about how modern tool sets are helping cut through that noise, so it just doesn't become overwhelming of what's out there as you try to monitor and operate in these environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it always depends, on what job you're trying to do. Our tool bench nowadays is gone from 10 feet long to 100 miles long, and we've got tools for every single thing that can be used in the wrong way or the right way, or both at the same time. So you need to figure out what you're doing, and that research is the way to do it. Understanding what you're trying to do. There are times when a Lambda is going to be the best thing, but you have to look at, can it run? How long can it run? What can it do? What are the limitations? It's just like anything else. You have to use the right tool, or you're going to get caught in a problem and have to redo it again. Same thing for security. All the major vendors implement a lot of different security tools you can add on, but is that something you need? Is that one of your attack surfaces? Where you have sensitive data that a person wants to ransomware, from what Joe mentioned, or they want to try to siphon off. So you got to look at what your workloads are, what you're trying to do, and which is the best way to do that.
Yeah, I think every kind of platform has their own pros and cons, and I'll give Azure, Microsoft a shout out here. Like, that's kind of from a built-in tools. I think they're kind of pushing that the most, and I think Jeff, you made a comment earlier about they are more ops focused versus dev focused, and I think that's showing that in their security offerings, right? They've got a defender for everything, right? Any type of stuff that you want to do up there, and then their Sentinel product is pretty well integrated. If you're a Microsoft 365 shop, you have a great set of tools that are kind of built in. That you can just turn on, get up and running. There's a lot of automations built into that. Google has kind of the same thing with their Chronicle product and things like that. So it's definitely getting better than even a few years back, where you really kind of had to hack together some stuff on your own up there. I think Azure is probably leading the way from that, but it kind of makes sense, right? If you look at most people have some sort of Active Directory environment, having something that hooks into that it's all kind of there. It makes it a lot easier for your infrastructure team to manage that. And that's yeah, there's definitely some built-in tools that I recommend to any of our customers, especially if they have a 365 presence, MCAS, Sentinel, the various defenders. It's a pretty good tool bench out there for that.
Yeah. Got about 5 minutes left. If we've had some participants come in, some others had to drop. Those of you that came in a little bit late, again, this is recorded and we're going to make it available, so you'll be able to go back and watch the full thing. But if you have any questions, throw them in Q&A or chat. But kind of closing out here, I want to get from each of you, if you had some, a few key takeaways that you could give to customers as they think about this cloud journey, what would those be? And Joe, I'll start with you, and then Craig, you can close us out with your thoughts.
Yeah, I think just kind of as a wrap up of some of the key things that we talked about today, I'll start with that shared services responsibility. Like, make sure you know what you're getting into and what you're on the hook for. Make sure that all teams are for that. The other thing I'll think is the learning curve for the staff, right? If you are in that migration journey and you've come from a traditional on-prem or kind of call it legacy networking side of it, making sure that you're getting the resources for your staff or your teams, or that they're working with somebody in your org that has that expertise, just so that they don't run into problems of some forgotten checkbox or some forgotten role, which is very easy to do. That expertise is, you don't want to learn that the hard way. So that's kind of, I would definitely recommend make sure that you're getting the training for your staff and the resources. Leveraging those built-in security tools and add-ons. It is getting better all the time. Anything that we can make ourselves easier with built-in tools or automations that we can do to scale that out. SaaS, we could probably talk a whole nother hour just on the SaaS side of it. But don't forget about that, right? It is still a cloud environment. And a lot of folks, I think, put that out of their mind of, oh, I'm in Salesforce or Workday or this or that. And you're still on the hook for that, right? If you have a breach or someone gets a hold of creds for somebody in your organization, that first thing you're going to do is try to do that. So making sure that you're using single sign-on or multi-factor across all those other SaaS apps, and that you have visibility into that. That's kind of one of those forgotten things. So those are a few things just off the top of my head, if we want to leave the audience with, of, hey, go back and talk to your teams about this.
Yeah, appreciate that, Craig. I'll let you same question.
Yeah, I would. Joe brought up a bunch of great points, things that are important to think about. For one thing, I'll attach on to is training for your resources. If this is a new journey for you, find a partner, somebody who can help you, even if it's just to bounce ideas off of, or, hey, is this possible to solve this? There's a lot of research. You can leave a lot of checkboxes undone on accident, or deploy the wrong thing that breaks the bank on the company, as Joe hinted at. So find somebody who can help you, even if it's just a community or a partner, whatever works best for you. But all of those things are important to think about as you're going through this journey, because you're not alone. Somebody's already done it before, and everybody can help each other make good choices.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll add in, a couple of thoughts from my end as we went through this. From removing the human element where you can, with the automation. I know that I know a lot of people hear automation and they think, well, I'm automating. You're automating my job. You're automating me out of a task. And my counterpoint to that would be, a cloud journey is not like your typical on-prem journey that we were all used to for so long of, we talked about earlier. I throw up a server, I kind of can throw up, VMs on there in the virtualized world. I can kind of just let them run. I don't need to really think about those day in and day out and what that environment looks like. We're just kind of grow and throw more stuff at it. And that changes completely. And as an IT staff, and you've probably heard the complexities of, you're going to have to work together as operations, as security, as development. There's going to be a lot more on your plate. Taking those manual tasks of clicking next in a console to spin up resources, especially if somebody clicks the wrong radio button and now you have exposed data like we talked about. So automation orchestration, I think, is going to be really key for anyone moving into the cloud, into a cloud environment, just for one, to help your staff not be so busy and keeping up with all that information out there, but also to reduce your own risk as you operate in a more spread out world, because you're not behind. It's it's the old that comment that's gotten popular over the last probably decade, right? Data is the new edge. You're not just operating behind your own little secure firewall that you can control. The crunching on the outside, is off in the middle, where you can just kind of keep everybody out. It is, to something Joe said earlier, wild, wild west. So, but guys, I really appreciate it. We were at the 1 o'clock hour, so those are able to join, appreciate it. Those that will watch this later on a recording, hope it was beneficial. Hope you got a lot out of this series. Hope it helped give some thoughts. And to Craig's point, make use. You've got a lot of help out there in the world. Make use of it, right? So we can all do this right and all help each other get it right out of the box. I think that's what we're all here for in this industry to begin with. So Craig, Joe, thanks again. Joe, we didn't talk about this at the beginning, but you made it through battling the hurricane down there in Florida. So
yeah. Speaking of hostile clouds, right?
Right, hostile cloud, right? Very hostile cloud environment. But yeah, so thank you guys again. Really appreciate all the time you've given us today and joining us on this webinar, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for setting this up.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Good talking to you, Joe. Bye.